trifocals back after 3 weeks, and now you're all fuzzy again. What does the fox say? I'm telling you what the fox says. The fox says, I'm going to get you. I'm going to dehumanize you. I'm going to violate you and make your life a living misery. And what does Jesus say in chapter 10 of Matthew, verse 16? Your mantra, be wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove. The one thing Jesus offers to all of us through his gift of the Holy Spirit is both wisdom, understanding, and an ability to discern when you are being violated. Now you must understand in the Bible, a violation definition really goes this way. It is a continuous assault on your humanity and your psyche. It may be physical, may be emotional, may be mouth, could be any combination of things. But the key thing is it is a continuous assault, violation on your humanity, where you probably know you're not feeling too good about yourself. You may think you don't have any capabilities or competence or skills or any of those kinds of things. It is that about which Jesus speaks in this section of the Sermon on the Mount today. He talks about it by means of telos, perfection. In the Bible, you can also translate perfection as the goal or completion of things. And what Jesus is teaching is very simply that through the gift of the Spirit and through the gift of your faith, you have been given the gift of maturity and knowing the way with a capital W, people of the way, to that maturity and to that fullness as an adult and to a fullness of being a human being. Now, the way Jesus goes about teaching this is by means of examples from his time, obviously. He lived in the first century AD. And so some of his examples are not always pertinent to us, but they will be as we go through them. The first thing that happened is that in that day, and this will sound altogether way too familiar, and I'm not being political here, just so you understand that. 96 to 97% of the population in the ancient world were considered in the lower classes of society and lived on daily wages. 3 to 4% of the population in the ancient world were in the upper classes and lived quite nicely, thank you. Now, here was the other thing that was legal in those days. If you were in that 96% of the population, where you lived on a daily rate and you worried about where your next drachma was coming from, it was perfectly okay if you did something that aggravated one of the other upper class people. What was socially acceptable was to give them a blow with the back of your right hand. Now I'm telling you, the back of your right hand to the right cheek of the one who aggravated you. Yes, like that. You know how to do that. Oh yeah, you're very good at that. Some of you don't even have to practice. It comes pretty natural. Okay, very good. Now you're working with it. Okay. So what happens, that was an upper class person diminishing the humanity of a lower class person that way. Now, when Jesus says turn the other cheek, here's where it gets very cheeky. If you were to strike a person with your open palm on your left cheek, you could only do that to an equal. Now understand, the equal could then smack you back, but he would also do it with an open palm. So when Jesus is saying turn the other cheek, it forces the violator or the offender or the diminisher of your humanity to recognize you as an equal. You get that? Nice. Okay. Very tricky, but very, very much pertinent in that day. That is his advice then through the gift of the Spirit to you today, to learn how to handle people who are diminishing your humanness, your fullness, your potential as a human being, by forcing them non-violently to recognize you as a fully human being. Now, his next example is also very good, and I want you to think about this for the mortgage defaults that have occurred that have really just ripped our poor Poconos apart. He was talking, using an example about somebody who was in such horrible debt that they lost everything. So what Jesus suggested, there was a law in those days that you could take everything, if you owed money and couldn't pay it, except your last piece of clothing. They could take everything. What Jesus said, instead of walking out with any of your clothing, take off your last piece of clothing, give that to the one who has taken it all away, and walk out of the courtroom bare naked nude. You have plucked me like a chicken already. Here I am, bare. I have nothing. Okay? Again, it is the forcing of the recognition by the powers that diminish your humanity to recognize what it is that they are doing. That is where he is going with that. Anything that diminishes a person must be confronted in a non-violent but powerful statement of protest. And that is what Jesus is saying, is that we Christians need to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. I keep thinking of everybody, regardless of how they got in the situation, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to give you this house, which is overpriced by $40,000, and you just pay interest for the first 3 years, and no problem, because when it's time to start paying, by that time the mortgage rates are going to go down, right? They're going to go down, so you'll be able to pay it easy, no problem. And to make up that difference of $35,000, $40,000, well, my God, we're going to give you a home equity line of credit on the future value of that house, because the rates are going up so good and so fast. I keep thinking, if everybody who lost their house had walked out of the courtroom naked, that would have spoken a word, would it not? In a non-violent, but most definitive way. You'll notice that what Pocono Alliance has done, and with the homeless and Family Promise, did really, really good, because it is a non-violent protest against the way things are, that debts and people who lost their houses and people with mental health issues who simply can't function, who have been burnt so bad and diminished in their humanity that they can't stand to be around people, they'd rather live under a bridge somewhere. And so the protest, non-violently, is what did they do? And all of us churches were involved in that. Instead of yelling about it and protesting and holding up signs, we said, we're going to go count heads. And brought it to the light of day that way. Non-violently, but publicly. And it took a long time. If you don't remember, I will tell you, it took a long time to count. So it stayed in the public eye for a long time. And as a result, our local community has responded in a reasonably good fashion, and will continue to work there to not diminish humanity, but to raise it back on the way to fullness and completion and maturity. And that takes resources, and that does take a community to make that happen. But that's the kind of thing that Jesus is talking about in terms of the nonviolent protest against those people and powers and principalities that diminish you. The other example that he uses is that of carrying a soldier's bag. That was a simple one. In the ancient world, wherever the Roman military went, their packs were about 75 to 80 pounds. And so they could impress literally. If I were a Roman soldier walking along, I'd say, Liz, here, and you would be legally bound to carry my 75-pound pack for 8 miles. And there were mile markers. The reason Jesus said, don't do it just for a mile, go the 2nd mile. Because it would both embarrass the soldier, and it would also get him in trouble. Because he had broken the rule of the Roman military code of ethics. You'll notice that what happened with Jesus, right? When he was carrying this cross, okay, one of the soldiers grabbed Simon of Cyrene and made him, didn't give him a choice, didn't ask him, said, carry the cross. And just so you know, since I've measured it off, he carried it 1/4 of a mile. So he was within his rights, the soldier was, of having Simon of Cyrene do that. And that is why, in Jesus' advice, it is always, the issue is at what point do you say no to a violation of your humanity? That is the issue, always. I notice with our young people, they are in their 20s and 30s, are constantly being violated because somehow we have not equipped them for living in a time in which jobs that they went to college for no longer exist. And they feel violated. It is the only word, violated. Now that is not anybody's fault, it is just the way it is. It is what has happened. The question becomes then, how do you then undo the violation where you feel less than fully human? Because you can't hardly make a living, and you're really suffering and struggling, and there's no manufacturing anymore, and there never will be. How do you deal with the violation of humanity as a definition, humanity of having dreams for the future and hopes for the future and participating in all of life, with a good job that you trained for, and it has disappeared. You see, there's more to humanness than just having a job. It has to do, and all of you who are working know this, you wouldn't be doing your jobs for years and years if you didn't get a sense of worth out of it. All of us. We do our jobs because we feel like we're adding something valuable to the world we live in. And this is going to become, and is already, one of the great social issues of our time. Created by powers and principalities that we'll never get a handle on. But nonetheless, the diminishment of humanness and human personality will need to be addressed. But that is the gift that has been given to you and to me through the gift of the Holy Spirit and the gift of faith. You know you are fully human because the faith that has been given you tells you that. You know you have value and worth because Jesus has said you do. You know you have a future because Jesus has assured it and promised it. And in that sense, it is an unchangeable promise, all of that. But in the circumstances of life, we must find a way and a path. And that is your calling as a follower of Jesus, to take the idea of a fullness of humanity and maturing in life, and help people to find a way so that they can grow and mature, not only in faith, but also in life. And if that means somehow we have to address the whole job issue with the disappearing of jobs after you graduate and have to go into something else, well, maybe that's where the mentoring. When was the last time? Anybody heard about the word apprentice in recent years? I forget, who were we talking to? I was talking to somebody about that recently. I don't remember who. But the whole notion, apprenticeship used to be the way, way back, in which somebody who was in a job or an occupation would just grab onto somebody, pay them, and teach them the skill. Nowadays, what happens with the young people, they're given what's called an internship after they graduate. And it's an unpaid internship for 6 months. with no guarantee of a job. That's called slavery. I'm so sorry I said that. We don't call it that. We call that opportunity. Depends on your perspective. If I'm a business owner, it's I'm creating an opportunity. But you get the idea. It is the humanness with which we address our fellow human beings and shape creative ways to bring them to a fullness of life that is our calling as people of God. And that is precisely what Jesus is addressing. And the only proviso is that we do that wise as serpents and gentle as doves, and in a non-violent fashion. That's your calling, and that's